I'm Jacob Hornberger, president of the Future of Freedom Foundation, and welcome to this week's Trump Watch, the show that y'all know keeps a watch on President Trump and reports back to you every week on his activities, especially those that tend toward destroying the rights and freedoms of the American people, as well as our economic well-being. So we'll begin with tariffs. Tariff Man is back. The whole tariff brouhaha had subsided somewhat for, a month and a half or so, until this deadline came up where Trump had given 70 countries a deadline to strike a deal with the United States or suffer the consequences of tariffs that he himself is imposing. That is to say, he's not going to Congress and saying, may I have your permission to impose these taxes on the American people, because that's what tariffs are. They are a tax, a sales tax. But it's not just a sales tax like when you walk into a store and you pay a sales tax when you buy something. These are taxes imposed when you purchase something from a foreign country. So he's imposing these taxes on the American people, and he's waiting for like trade deals from 70 countries or so. But now he's gotten exasperated because he doesn't have these trade deals, and so he's now back to putting taxes, tariffs on a variety of countries. One of the interesting aspects of this is Vietnam, which, as everyone knows, is run by a communist regime. It's been run by a communist regime ever since they defeated the U.S. national security establishment in its invasion of Vietnam. But yet, they've reached this deal with Trump where they have no tariffs on American goods. But Trump has imposed a 20% tax on the American people for any goods they purchase out of Vietnam. Now, when this whole brouhaha started, this communist regime said, hey, look, we're first in line. We will have free trade, no tariffs, and so you guys will agree to do the same thing, because they thought that that's what Trump wanted. That Trump was using this as a negotiating tactic to establish free trade between other countries. Well, they learned a harsh lesson. That's not what Trump's talking about. What Trump's talking about is trade deficits and trade surpluses, which is an absolutely ludicrous concept, ridiculous concept. I mean, we can see that domestically here. Nobody worries about the trade deficit between Virginia and Florida, for example. It's just irrelevant. In fact, I doubt if they even publish statistics. In fact, that would be the best thing in the world, is if the U.S. government just didn't publish or even learn about the statistics of trade between nations. It's totally irrelevant. It's inane. But Trump says to Vietnam, well, no, it was not a negotiating tactic. It was that I want a 20% tariff, even if your tariff is zero. And this is ironic because that Vietnam's position really is the ideal economic position. That in other words, just because another nation imposes taxes on its citizens, the worst thing that can happen is for the other nation to say, well, we're going to retaliate against you by imposing taxes on our citizens. So Vietnam got it right and said, we're not going to impose sales taxes on foreign goods and on American goods on the Vietnamese people, which is so ironic because they're like a socialist country. And Trump is saying, well, okay, you may not do it, but I'm going to do it over here in the United States. So he imposes a 20% tax on the American people for any goods they buy from Vietnam. And I think it goes up to 40% if there's any indication that China, that's the new official boogeyman after Russia, of course, that we all supposed to be scared of. And if they use Vietnam to sell their goods to the United States, the tariff is like 40%. But you see, in Trump's mind, he has won. He has won the trade war against the communist regime in Vietnam because he's got a 20% tariff. So it's like for him, it's a trade surplus. You see that we're taxing them, their goods. The tax, of course, is paid by the American people, and they're not taxing our goods. But in reality, Vietnam's doing it the right way, which is so ironic because they're the communist regime, they're the socialist regime, and go figure. Now, that's not the only thing Trump's doing. Now, of course, Trump's doing this without the specific consent of Congress. That apparently many years ago, Congress said, well, in the event of a national emergency, you have the authority to raise these taxes on the American people. And so, duh, Trump declares a national emergency. And so he says, well, I can raise these taxes on the American people whenever I want. And he does. He just willy-nilly, 30% tariff on Mexico. And it's always phrased in terms of on Mexico, but it really is a tax on the American people. Now, does it hurt people in Mexico or Canada or the EU? Of course. I mean, because it makes their goods more costly, and therefore some of them, the marginal ones, will be put out of business. A lot of suffering, which is really counterproductive, especially like with Mexico and Latin American countries, because you often hear supporters of immigration controls saying, well, if they would get their house in order, Jacob, they wouldn't be all their citizens wouldn't be trying to come over here to get get jobs in the United States. But when you've got these tariff wars going on, instituted by the U.S. government, that makes economic conditions worse in Mexico and other Latin American countries, which of course is exactly opposite to what they want to do. They make conditions worse, which causes more people to want to come to the United States. And then you get, oh, Jacob, the invaders are coming, the invaders are coming. So that their own policies are counter to what they want in the area of immigration. And it's not just tariffs. You've got sanctions, embargoes that create horrific economic conditions in these Latin American countries. And then when the people flee, the death by starvation that they're being targeted with for the purpose of regime change, everybody goes ballistic. Oh, why are those Venezuelans coming over here? Well, maybe because they've got a socialist system that creates economic chaos and crisis, along with U.S. sanctions, not to mention the U.S. drug war. So the sanctions are like a vice, with the socialism and the sanctions squeezing the lifeblood out of the Venezuelan people. They're faced with death by starvation. And then the drug cartels that are a direct result of the U.S. drug war, they start recruiting their children. So people are saying, well, what do we do? Do we stay here and watch our daughters and sons go into the drug cartels so they can help us avoid death by starvation? Well, millions of them said, we're getting out of here. And I'd venture to say I think many Americans would make the same choice, especially ones with children. But when some of those people came to the United States, the immigration status were up in arms. Oh, look, criminals, they were opposing the Maduro regime in Venezuela. Oh, that's against the law in Venezuela. Oh, criminals. And then the idea was deport them back to Venezuela. Okay, but can you at least lift the sanctions when you're doing this? No. They're going to have to die or get regime change and put in a U.S. puppet there in Venezuela with a violent revolution where countless people are going to get killed because they have gun control in Venezuela, which a lot of states here in the United States support. And so how are they supposed to fight a revolution without guns? Massacre? So it's ugly. The whole system is ugly. The tariff system's ugly, the trade war system, the sanctions, the drug war, the immigration control system, which is a socialist system, of course, based on socialist central planning. It's just an ugly picture all across the board. Now, that's not the only thing that Trump is using tariffs for. Now he's imposing or threatening to impose tariffs on Brazil. Okay, now why Brazil? Well, I don't know whether they have the trade deficit or trade surplus or whatever, but Trump's upset because the former president of Brazil, Bolsonaro, is being indicted there, prosecuted for, unlawful trying to oust the president Lula from office, some kind of coup attempt, something like that. And Trump is up in arms, undoubtedly, because it reminds him of the January 6th events over here, where he was saying that the election was stolen, And so I imagine, and it's just my opinion, that this is bringing back bad memories for him. The fact that they're going after Bolsonaro because Bolsonaro supposedly wants to oust Lula or run against Lula or whatever. But I mean, this is a domestic inside Brazil matter. But Trump is saying, I don't like what you're doing to Bolsonaro, and so I'm going to impose tariffs on you or higher tariffs on you. It's just amazing. I mean, this is just classic interventionism, but in a different way. I mean, those of you know, as all of you know, libertarians stand against foreign interventionism, foreign aid, including to the Israeli government, the Ukrainian government, all across the board, end foreign aid. It's just an evil, immoral, destructive government program. But we oppose all foreign interventionism, the invasions, the wars of aggression, the sanctions, the embargoes, the coups, state-sponsored assassinations, on and on. It's just a bad way of life, but this is just another form of that interventionism with Trump using tariffs as a way to change what's going on inside of another country. All right, so let's see. What's going else? Oh, we got Ukraine. Okay. Now, this is really fascinating because it wasn't too long ago where President Trump said that Ukraine started the war. Now, he never explained what he meant by that, but I imagine that what he meant was that NATO had gone all the way eastward, absorbing former members of the Warsaw Pact into NATO. And so NATO forces were inexorably moving eastward, U.S. missiles and bombs and planes and troops getting ever closer to Russia's borders. And when the Cold War ended and the Soviet Union, Russia was bringing all its troops home, and East and West Germany were being united, the Berlin Wall was falling, Russia just got a commitment from U.S. officials saying that NATO would stay right where it was and that it would not ever expand eastward, threatening Russia by moving eastward. And U.S. officials made that promise. Said, no, we won't get involved in this. I mean, this is detailed in Scott Horton's great book called Provoked that I highly recommend you buying and reading because all the evidence is there that the promises were made. Now, what really should have happened at the end of the Cold War is NATO should have been dismantled. It's an old Cold War dinosaur. It was brought into existence supposedly to protect Western Europe from a Soviet invasion, which was nonsense because the Soviet Union was devastated in World War II, destroyed. The last thing they were going to do is start a war, a new war, when they had just finished a war against Nazi Germany. They didn't have that capability, especially since they knew the United States would be involved, and the United States was the only nation at that time that had nuclear weapons and the will to use them against populated cities. The Japanese had learned that. So there was never any possibility whatsoever that the Soviets were going to invade Western Europe, but this is part of that old Cold War racket, inculcate the fear of communists and the Reds and the Russians are coming, and NATO was all part of that racket. So it should have been dismantled, though, because that was its purpose, to protect Western Europe from the Soviet Union. Well, the Soviet Union was now dismantled, so there was no reason to keep NATO in existence. But the U.S. national security establishment had known that Russia had served as a great means by which to keep it in power, the national security state, which, of course, was an alien form of governmental structure. Certainly the U.S. wasn't founded on that structure. President Eisenhower pointed that out in his farewell address, that this is a different kind of system we have now, a national security state. Our nation had been founded as a limited government republic. And so here's the national security state, using Russia as this big boogeyman that were coming to get us, much like, the terrorists would later be used. Back then it was the communists. And so they used this racket. They weren't about to let go of this racket. It had been too lucrative during the whole Cold War, so they had to figure out a way to bring Russia back as an official enemy, and that was their goal. So NATO starts moving eastward. Russia keeps saying, stop, 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 and they just smile and keep moving eastward. So Ukraine finally says, hey, I want to join too. I want to be absorbed. And that's when Russia said, no, that's the red line. you're not going to cross that red line. And Ukraine said, oh, yes, we are. And so they crossed it, and then NATO said, well, we're going to invite them. And so Russia says, then I'm going to get it. We're going to invade and stop this, much as the U.S. It was intent on doing when the Russians put their missiles there in Cuba. That if the Russians had continued maintaining their missiles there with no deal with President Kennedy, there's no question that the U.S. would have invaded Cuba, just like Russia invaded Ukraine. It's not right, but it's just a fact of life. Nobody likes nuclear missiles right near their borders, or even foreign troops, including German troops. You see that Germany had invaded Russia during World War II, and Germany's part of NATO, of course, and had destroyed the entire country. So I imagine that's what President Trump meant when he said Ukraine started the war, that if it had not said, we want to join NATO and disavowed any intent to join NATO, Russia wouldn't have invaded. So to me, it's still the weirdest thing in the world that Zelensky, the president of Ukraine, would sacrifice all those Ukrainian men and the entire country, really. The whole country's been destroyed. Not for freedom, okay? They're not fighting for freedom. They're fighting for the right to join this old Cold War dinosaur. Who would sacrifice his whole country for the right to join an old Cold War dinosaur? What would motivate him to do that? But in any event, so here's Trump saying, well, Ukraine started the war, but guess what he's doing now? He's resuming aid to Ukraine, the country that he thinks started the war. And he's now threatening sanctions on Russia. He's mad at Russia because he thought that he could just instruct Putin stop the war, that just through force of will that he was going to do this. Remember, during his campaign, I'll stop this war in 24 hours. But he doesn't understand that without doing something about NATO, Russia's not interested in just stopping the war, because then they're back to square one, where Ukraine says we want to join NATO. So as soon as they have a peace agreement, Ukraine goes back and says, hey, we want to join NATO. And NATO says, hey, come on in. And now they're back to the same position they were right before the war. So the ultimate solution really is dismantle NATO. Okay, that just dismantle it totally. And then Russia doesn't have that problem anymore. But it's to me, it's so ironic that here, for how many 4 years, they were accusing Trump of being an agent of the Russians, a secret agent. And isn't that what at least one of the impeachments was all about, and that he was too cozy with Russia and so forth? And so now he's threatening Russia with sanctions for not reaching a deal with the person that he says started the war. So what really is going on here? Okay, well, this is just my opinion. But I think what's happened is that Trump's been absorbed by the deep state. Remember he used to exclaim against the deep state, draining the swamp and stuff? He's been absorbed. And as you all know, I have long been maintaining a thesis that the national security branch of the government is in control. At the very least with respect to foreign policy, but really the overall government. And I'm not the only one who says this. You all know that I've long recommended a book. I wish every American would read this book. I've said that before. National Security and Double Government by Michael Glennon. Fantastic book. And he's not some quack. He's professor of law at Tufts University. He is former counsel to the U.S. Senate Foreign Relations Committee. He has spoken at FFF seminars. He's a legal scholar, and he says the national security branch of the government is in charge and has been in charge for a very long time. Now, they'll let Trump maintain the veneer like he's in charge, and the judiciary and the Congress, but everybody understands in Washington where the real power is. And so I think that's what's going on here. Just my opinion that Trump has been absorbed. I don't know why or how it came to be, but the fact that he has flipped so dramatically here with respect to his relationship with Russia and Putin, and now he's threatening Putin, to me, the most logical answer is that the National Security Branch, which has long had this obsession about Russia, never let go of it, they're now in charge. And all that Trump asked for is, let me have the appearance that I'm calling the shots. And they say, fine, we don't care about that. So when Trump orders the bombing of Iran, I don't think it's Trump. I think it's the Pentagon and the CIA and the NSA. That the more chaos they can create in the world, the more crises, the more anxiety they can produce within the American people, the better off they are, because people won't oppose $1 trillion budget for the national security state. They won't oppose the existence. And look how many Americans today say, oh, Jacob, we couldn't do without a national security state. Well, look at all the people that want to do us harm. And so they've been very successful in creating this sense that we are protecting you. We are keeping you safe. Much like, the fox that puts all the chickens in the chicken cage and then locks the door and says, I'll keep you safe. So I think that's what's happening here is the national security branch took control and says we've got to keep funding Ukraine, and we got to keep opposing Russia, and so now Trump's on board. So all the stuff with the impeachment, agent of Russia, and all this was always pure nonsense, because the national security establishment was always going to be maintaining its control that it's had forever and ever since America was converted to a national security state. There's also the Epstein controversy, where they're saying, oh, well, there's no list, and after they said there was a list. But, all they have to do, they have a huge investigatory file. They had this guy indicted, a federal indictment. Now, when you indict somebody, you've got a lot of evidence on them. You're not just going to willy-nilly indict somebody without evidence, because then you got to go to trial. So if you don't have the evidence beforehand, it's very unlikely you're going to get the evidence after the indictment. So you compile your evidence before the indictment. And so they've got to have a huge file there. Why don't they release that? Okay. And they say there's no list, customer list. Okay. But just give us the whole file. Just open it up. The guy's dead anyway. What difference does it make? Just give us all the information that you had to justify the indicting the guy. And they could do that. There's no reason at all why they can't just say, here are the investigative files. And if one of those documents refers to a list, well, then maybe there was a list after all. But you see, that's why they often try to keep these things secret, because they know that you start pulling on this thread or that thread, and the whole thing comes unraveled. But that's really what they need to do. Is it going to happen? I don't think so. I think they're going to keep all those investigative files secret for whatever reason. All right, so let's see. We've got the immigration raids, of course. They continue to go on. I mean, Los Angeles is now starting to see what it's like to live on the border. I mean, y'all know that I've spent over 30 years of my life on the border, living under that police state. And it is a police state. It's an immigration police state. Highway checkpoints, warrantless searches of farms and ranches, raids, all kinds of stuff like that, police state stuff, that you find in totalitarian and authoritarian countries. Well, the people in L.A. are now experiencing that. You've got troops there. You've got raids, violent raids. You've got raids on people standing outside Home Depot and looking for jobs and work and so forth. And then there was this big raid on a marijuana farm there, where they rounded up, I don't know how many illegal immigrants there. But notice what's happening here, though, especially from a libertarian standpoint. You've got all these people that are working at this farm. Okay, now the farm belongs to the owner of the farm. I don't know who the owner is, but whoever it is, they own the farm. It's their money. They choose to hire these people at some agreed upon wage. The people there agree to the wage. It's probably like 10 times what they would make back in their home countries. So everybody's happy. Okay, they're both improving their own well-being. I mean, that's what trade is. You give up something you value less, and you get something you value more. So in every trade, people are benefiting, and so the farmer's benefiting. The workers are benefiting. Everybody's happy. Who are they hurting? I mean, remember, it's their money. It's the farmer's money. And then when he transfers it to the worker, it becomes their money, and they send a lot of it back to their families and their home countries, which probably will be less now because now they've passed this new law where they're taxing the remittances. These are the poorest people in the world you'd ever find. And the U.S. government is now going to start taxing some of the money they send back to their families. I mean, again, we go back to that point. Do you want people to be prospering in these foreign countries or not? Because remember that old thing that they always say, Jacob, if they would get their house in order down there economically, they wouldn't have to come to the United States. Well, really, then why not give them a chance to do that? But in any event, this is all just freedom of association, liberty of contract. These are pursuit of happiness. These are the things Jefferson was talking about in the Declaration of Independence that we just, celebrated. That people have a right to liberty. That includes liberty of contact, freedom of association. And it's not just Americans. Jefferson wasn't talking about just Americans. Everybody in the world has these natural God-given rights of life, which encompasses the right to sustain one's life through labor, through trade. And then liberty of contact, freedom of association, freedom of movement, freedom of travel, the right to get an apartment with somebody on a consensual basis, or a home, to buy things at Walmart, to stand out at Home Depot and get a job. I mean, the guys that are standing out there looking for day work, I guarantee you they're paycheck to paycheck. And of course they're scared to death because the Border Patrol or the ICE or whoever is over there looking and ready to round up anybody they see that's looking for these jobs. But my gosh, the people that pick them up say, hey, can you come and paint my bedroom? Yeah, I can do that. And they go, and everybody's happy because these guys can paint well. They can repair things well and whatever. They're day laborers, but they're very good at what they do. And the homeowners or the business owners are very happy. That's why they go over there and pick them up. It's all a mutual, consensual thing. It's a fascinating system, part of a free market system. But boy, no, the immigration control advocates, no, this is terrible, Jacob. This is terrible that all these people are pursuing happiness and pursuing liberty of contract and freedom of association, and we got to destroy these rights because Jefferson was wrong. Those rights belong only to Americans, and only Americans have the right to pursue happiness. And it's crazy. Now I just read an article where a lot of people, the illegal immigrants, are making arrangements for their kids who are American citizens because they were born here, and they're signing documents that in an event that they're seized, like walking down the street by those maskless agents that are, whenever I see those guys in civilian clothes and masks, I immediately think of a totalitarian country. Just total totalitarian, like kidnapping and disappearing people off the streets. Well, a lot of these illegal immigrants are now making arrangements with formal documents as to designating who should take care of their kids because they're scared to death that their kids will end up under the control of the federal government, ICE or whatever. And so they've signing these documents, signing their rights over to the kids in the event that they are picked up. It's just horrible. It's just because they want their kids to be growing up here in the United States rather than going back and suffering the conditions in some third world country in Latin America. Finally, we got a couple minutes here. There's still the push, Trump's push to oust Powell from the head of the Federal Reserve. That Trump wants lower interest rates because he thinks, this is a surefire, quick way to inject prosperity into an economy, which of course is being devastated by the tariffs and trade wars and so forth. But Trump says, it's like you take a dead person and inject adrenaline in something, and all of a sudden, boy, he's going to be popping up and so forth, or at least somebody near death. This is crazy. We've seen the Federal Reserve do this for umpteen years, ever since it was founded. This is why you have these booms and busts. This is what the Austrian School of Economics teaches us. Booms and busts, because of this interest rate manipulation. And the paper money system that Franklin Roosevelt, the president in the 30s, forced it on the American people unconstitutionally. Our system was based on gold coins and silver coins. It's not a total free market monetary system, but it certainly provided sound money for more than 100 years. But it was the constitutional system, and Roosevelt changes it overnight without a constitutional amendment. It was just phenomenal. So we're in this system where and it booms and busts, and Trump is saying, "Oh, I want a new Fed chairman to lower those interest rates," and like a big shot of adrenaline into a dying body, and it's not going to work. But now they've got Powell possibly not telling the entire truth. At least that's the accusation, and he's denying it, about renovations in the Federal Reserve building. Apparently some very nice renovations, which of course you'd expect from these people if there's no monitoring or no oversight and so forth. But they're going after him now on that basis, and Trump's also, the speculation is that he might appoint a shadow Fed chairman, like one he would appoint if Powell would leave, put pressure on him. And I think part of this, as I've pointed out before, is the scapegoating. I mean, we all can see that immigrants are being used as a scapegoat for the woes of the welfare warfare state. They're the perfect scapegoat. Oh, if only we got rid of purify America of all the illegal immigrants, America would be great again. It's not going to happen, because it's the dysfunctional systems that are the cause of America's woes. It's not illegal immigrants. In fact, they're actually contributing to the well-being of America, the prosperity of America, whether by vitality and work ethic and energy and entrepreneurship. But to a certain extent, the Federal Reserve is being set up to take the fall too, that if things do collapse with $37 trillion in debt and climbing and so forth, that they've got the Powell and the Federal Reserve to blame. All right, that's my report for this week. Thank you all for tuning in, and thank you again for your great support of our work. We're just very honored and very appreciative. We couldn't do it obviously without those of you that help us out financially, and I'm very honored and very appreciative. See you next week.